Book of Spells. Evelyn was attracted to forgotten items. Faded books whose spines had cracked with age, thrift store trinkets covered in dust, ramshackle houses weighed down by the passage of time. She had therefore felt like she was meant to have found the brown, leather-bound volume in the attic of her recently passed grandma's cottage. The volume was heavy, its cover decorated with curling symbols that appeared to ripple beneath the brush of her fingertips. It had no title on the cover, merely a faint, ink symbol that glowed softly in response when she placed her fingertips upon it. The cottage, in the heart of the forest of Blackthorn Hollow, had stood empty for 6 months since her grandmother's death. Evelyn, aged 24, had inherited it, but she had not set foot there until today. It was like desecrating a grave, rummaging through her grandmother's belongings. But the bank was getting anxious about the estate, and Evelyn had run out of excuses. The attic was a labyrinth of boxes and cobwebs, heavy with the odor of mold and something pungent, like scorched herbs. She had discovered the book hidden beneath a stack of old, moth-eaten quilts, in a wooden trunk with a rusted lock that powdered in her hands. The pages were dry, yellow, and covered in handwritten text in a language she couldn't understand. Scattered throughout were pictures of circles and sigils, stained with what appeared to be dried blood or wax. Evelyn's heart accelerated. Her grandmother had been a healer, with a reputation for her remedies, but this was not a recipe manual. This was something old, something forbidden. She took the book downstairs into the kitchen, its late afternoon light seeping through warped panes. The cottage groaned around her, protesting her findings. Seated in the oak dining table, she opened the book to a page that was bookmarked with a black ribbon. The writing was dense, but for one part, written in English, its ink newer than the others, as if inserted afterward. It was a spell labeled, "To call the Keeper of Secrets." It was easy in its instructions: mark a circle with chalk, center a candle in it, and recite the incantation at midnight. The spell guaranteed that hidden secrets would be revealed, questions that no mortal could know. Softly, Evelyn laughed, swishing her auburn locks out of her face. She was not superstitious. She had grown up dismissing her grandmother's stories of energies and ghosts as quaint myths. But the book's heft in her hands was alive, and she felt a thrill run through her. What was the damage that could be done by a little experiment? It was mere words, mere play. She checked the clock. 6 hours until the strike of midnight. Enough time to get ready. She discovered chalk in a drawer, its surface white and brittle, and a stub of candle in a kitchen cupboard. The floorboards of the cottage creaked beneath her as she made a clear spot in the living room, nudging aside a threadbare rug. It was harder to make the circle than she had anticipated, the chalk snapping twice, her hands shaking, although she cautioned herself it was merely the cold of the unheated room. The sigils in the book were complicated, curling lines that appeared to refuse copying. She finished, the circle appearing lopsided, but it was a likeness of the diagram, good enough. It grew dark in the cottage, the woods outside being quiet. Evelyn lit the candle, its flame flickering even in the motionless air. She sat cross-legged in front of the circle, the book on her lap open. The incantation was brief, a cluster of syllables that weighed on her tongue, like stones in a well. The words hesitated initially, then improved, as if something directed her voice. The candle jumped, its fire casting leaping shadows upon the walls. The atmosphere became dense, weighing on her chest. She completed the incantation, and there was a silence that was so complete that the world appeared to be holding its breath. And then the floorboards creaked. Not the old familiar groan of wooden floorboards, but a heavy, intense sound, as of footsteps going around the room. Evelyn stood stock still, her gaze sweeping the shadows. The candle guttered, and for one fleeting instant, she was sure she had seen something. A tall, featureless shape, its borders dissolving into shadows. She caught her breath, and softly said, "Hello?" No reply was forthcoming, but the air cooled, and the book in her lap grew heavy, its pages whispering despite the absence of any breath that touched them. The creaking ceased, but was replaced by the humming of a sound too deep for one's ears. Evelyn's skin crawled. She leapt up, knocking over the candle. The flame went out, and the darkness gathered around her. She groped for the light switch, her heart racing. When the light fixture flickered on, the circle was vacant, the chalk smudged, as though something had been pulled across it. The open book lay on the table, its pages unmoving. Evelyn laughed unsteadily, attempting to dislodge the dread churning in her stomach. It was nothing but her imagination, fueled by the darkness and the creepy cottage. She pushed the chalk aside, snapped the book shut, and stuffed it into a drawer. But as she got into bed, the silence was wrong. The trees outside were too still, the air too thick. And in the darkness she swore she heard it again, that low, humming voice, murmuring just out of reach of her understanding. Evelyn awoke with the scrape of nails on wood, faint but unmistakable, from below her bedroom. She held perfectly still, staring up at the ceiling, hoping it was the wind or a mouse, but the scraffling was regular, intense, and continued. It was 3:17 a.m., witching hour, her gran had called it. She felt a chill run down her spine. She had not slept well. Following the spell, she had tossed and turned, disturbed by the hum she had heard, that near voice that had seemed suspended in the air. Now, the scratching awakened her from sleep, her feet icy bare on the floorboards. She snatched a flashlight from the bedside nightstand, its light piercing the dark as she made her way down the stairs. The cottage was quiet save for that noise, now louder, in the kitchen. The light cut through the room, crossing the oak table, the sink, the drawers she had secreted the book in. The scratching ceased, and Evelyn caught her breath. She was still, listening. Silence. Only the heavy stillness of the woods pushing in on the windows. She inched forward, her flashlight trembling, and opened the drawer. The book was still there, its cover softly reflecting, as if it was soaking up the illumination. She slammed the drawer closed, her heart pounding. It was nothing, she reassured herself. Old houses creaked and groaned. But as she turned, the air changed, became dense, like a storm pent up, ready to burst. The flashlight dimmed, and for an instant she caught a glimpse of something taller than a man, in the corner. Its boundaries were unclear, like smoke, but its existence was certain, impinging on her head. She gasped, and the light steadied. The corner was vacant. She ran up to her bedroom and locked the door, but she knew that was useless. What she had sensed was not confined by doors. She sat on the bed, holding the flashlight, until morning colored the horizon gray. It was then that she went back down. The kitchen was just as she had left it, the drawer still closed, the atmosphere ordinary. But the book was warmer to her hands, heavier, as if it had taken in something during the night. She spent the morning poring over the book for answers. Its pages were a maze of magic and warnings, most in that incomprehensible writing. But a single passage, written in the margins, caught her attention. The Keeper of Secrets responds, but with a price. Once invoked, it stays tied to the invoker until the circle is broken. The words gave her chills. Did she call something forth? The spell had appeared harmless, something out of a parlor show. But the shadow, the noise of scratching, the hum, they were real. She was going to take the book to a library, a university, a place that someone might be able to comprehend it. But as she stuffed its pages into her backpack, the cottage resisted her. Its doors stuck, its windows wouldn't budge, and the air became thick, like cloth in her lungs. She attempted to call her friend Sarah, but her phone indicated that there was no signal. when only yesterday it had functioned perfectly. A cold, seeping panic set in. She was ready by noon, with the book in her backpack. But as she grabbed for the front door, the scratching became louder, issuing from the walls themselves. The noise swept around her, as of something just out of reach. She stepped back, her gaze flicking to the windows. Out there, in the woods, everything was still, the trees stiff, like guardians watching her. She dashed into the kitchen, yanking out the book from her backpack. There was something that could be done, she was certain, that would reverse the spell. She tore through its pages, her hands trembling, but the writing appeared indistinguishable, the letters sliding off. The scratching became sharper, accompanied by that humming, now louder, taking on syllables she couldn't comprehend. The pressure of the air on her, the flickering of the light, creating strobe-like shadows in the room. Evelyn sank down on her knees, opening the book widely. She read the spell a second time, its printed English stark on the page next to the faded ancient text. There was no reversing it, no banishment of what she had called forth. But she remembered the circle's text by heart. Until the circle is undone. She had swept the chalk off the floor, but perhaps that was not sufficient. Perhaps the circle remained, hidden, holding the thing in its power. She clutched the chalk in her hand, her hands trembling. The living room floor was empty, the rug still rolled back. She retraced the circle, copying the sigils as accurately as she could. The hum increased in strength, the air resonating with it, and the shadows appeared thicker, collecting in the corners. Evelyn lit another candle, her hands awkward with the match. She had no idea what to say, so she performed the incantation in reverse, in hopes of reversing the spell. The flame on the candle jumped, and the hum grew into a bellow that rocked the cottage. Evelyn shrieked, retreating as the shadows materialized into a presence, looming, blank-eyed, its body an empty hole that consumed the light. It stretched out toward her, and she skittered back, the book snapping closed. The bellow ceased, and the presence disappeared, leaving behind silence. Evelyn sat there, the candle still alight. The circle was still in place, yet the atmosphere was different, lighter. Had it succeeded? She had no way of knowing. But the book was closed, and for the first time since midnight she was alone. Evelyn did not sleep. She sat in the living room, the candle burning down, gazing at the circle as it might suddenly burst into life. The quiet was heavy, punctuated by that occasional, faint creak of the cottage, as if its very foundations were shifting. The book sat next to her, its cover shining pale, as if taunting her. She was afraid to pick it up, not since having seen what she had seen. The figure, eyeless, and absence-taken form, ghosted through her head. It had not left. She sensed it, just on the edge of perception, watching. The dawn did not bring any respite. The woods outside were veiled in mist, and the trees were hardly visible through the windows. Evelyn's phone was still out of signal, and the kitchen radio hissed with static. She tried the front door, but it would not open, its handle cold and immovable. The cottage was a prison, its walls clamping in around her. She was alone, isolated, with nothing but the book and the creature she had awakened. She pushed herself to eat, but the bread was bitter, like ash in her mouth. Her mind was in overdrive, fitting together what she had learned. The spell had invoked the Keeper of Secrets, a presence that now terrified her. According to the book, it persisted until the circle was broken, but she had tried to counter the spell, and it had infuriated it. She needed to know, and the only guide she had was the book. Bracing herself, she opened it anew, her hands gloved to prevent contact with the pages. The writing was still illegible, but she discovered further English jottings on the margins, faint and hasty, written as in a state of terror. One cautioned, "The keeper is bound to the summoner's intent." In order to banish, seal the circle with intent. Another, in red ink, was written. Don't say its name. It listens. Evelyn's stomach turned. Did her granny have any knowledge of this? The cottage had been safe, the epitome of cozy, with her granny's presence. Yet now, each shadow seemed to conceal something. She tried again. The circle was still there, its chalk smudged but still in place. She copied the sigils with precision, redrawing the circle carefully. The book did not say anything about sealing with intent, but she hoped that meant concentration, conviction. She did not know that she believed in anything anymore, but she was motivated by fear. She collected supplies, salt from the kitchen, rosemary in a jar, and a silver pendant that her grandmother had given her, a crescent moon with the runes etched into it. It was during noon, when the light was brightest, that she started. She sprinkled salt on the circle, uttering the protective words of ritual she had discovered in the book. She burned the rosemary, its smoke ascending, permeating the air with its pungent, refreshing odor. The pendant she set in the center of the circle, its metal shining. She knelt, the book opened on a new spell, this one. To bind and banish. It had no incantation, but rather would need clear thinking and a verbal promise in order to seal the circle. She closed her eyes, attempting to concentrate. She visualized the figure, its empty-eyed face, and herself banishing it back whence it had arrived. I seal the circle, she spoke, quivering. I banish the keeper of secrets. Depart this location and never return. The words were empty, but she said them louder, hoping that they meant something. The air thickened, the rosemary smoke growing heavy. The pendant pulsed, a humming starting up from it. Evelyn's skin crawled, and she opened her eyes. The circle pulsed with a dim light, the chalk lines glowing. The humming was not from the pendant. It was the same dull, growling noise she had heard earlier, but louder, and now anger-laced. The light flashed, and the shadows around the room grew long, contorting into twisted forms that were not human. She continued speaking, her voice cutting over the hum. I banish you! The pendant blazed, and for an instant she believed it was going to work. The light grew brighter, the air charged with power. But the candle flickered out, and the humming turned into a scream, a noise that ripped through her head. The light of the circle was extinguished, and the darkness rolled in, forming the figure once again. It was nearer now, its body firmer, its presence weighing on her breath. Evelyn retreated, toppling the book. The figure loomed, its face empty of eyes, as if beholding her soul. She clung to the pendant, holding it like a lifeline. The figure hesitated, and the scream dissipated, silenced by a whisper. Her name, said in a voice that was not of this world. Evelyn! She shrieked, hurled the pendant. It went through, alighting in the circle, and the figure of darkness dissolved, the shadows curling in upon themselves. The room was silent, the air alight once more. Evelyn sat gasping, her heart racing. The circle was empty, the chalk blackened, as burned. The book lay open on the new page, one she had not previously read, with but a single line. The keeper cannot be banished. It can but be bound. She gazed in horror at the text, dread churning in her stomach. She had managed not to repel it, but had she sealed it? The cottage was different, the atmosphere lighter, but the chain was absent, engulfed by the circle. And in the quiet she felt it for the second time, a faint voice, her name, from within the walls. Evelyn did not touch the book for the remainder of that day. She could not. Its presence in the cottage was a burden, a repeated reminder of what she had done. The circle was still there, its chalk lines darkened, as though the floor had been burned. She kept clear of the living room, huddling in the kitchen, where the light was safer. But safety was a lie. The whispers persisted, subtle but unrelenting, her name embedded in the creaks of the cottage. She attempted yet another escape. The front door remained immovable, and the windows were blocked, their frames warped like they'd been soldered together. She slammed her fists on the glass, hollering for rescue, but the forest absorbed the sound. Behind her, the mist had still not dissipated, hiding the trees in a gray curtain. She couldn't call for help, her phone flickering with static as she tried to send a signal. She was imprisoned, and the keeper of secrets was with her. Desperation propelled her back to the book by nightfall. She had to know what binding was. The passage she discovered. The keeper cannot be banished. It can only be bound. Provided no guidance, but it was the only clue she had. She sat by the kitchen table, the book open in front of her, its pages whispering despite her stationary hands. The air turned chill, and the whispers became sharper, turning into words she couldn't quite catch. She uncovered a new page, written in English, its ink faded but readable. It spoke of the keeper as a being of knowledge, old and voracious, attracted by those seeking taboo truths. It had to be bound, the summoner had, and for that, something had to be given in exchange, a secret, a memory, a piece of oneself. The text cautioned that the keeper would decide on the price, and it was never insignificant. Evelyn's hands were shaking. She had no secret she could give, no memory she could give up. But the whispers increased in volume, and the shadows in the cottage seemed to follow her, watching. She attempted it. She recreated the circle, with new chalk, although the burned lines beneath were evident. She set a new candle in the center, its flame burning steadfast even in the draught that now swept through the house. The book was open on the binding spell, its letters basic but weighty. Offer what is yours, and the keeper will be bound. Evelyn went down on her knees, her heart racing, and spoke. I present you with a secret, she said, speaking softly, her voice hardly audible. Seize it and be forever bound. She had no idea what secret she was referring. Her fears, her doubts, her guilt over her grand's passing? The air grew dense, and the candle flame flickered. The whisper ceased, and in its place was a silence that stung her ears. She waited for the figure to materialize, but there was nothing. The candle guttered, and the circle was still dark. A sense of relief swept over her, tenuous but genuine. Did it succeed? She got up, her legs trembling, and closed the volume. The cottage was lighter, the atmosphere less suffocating. She even laughed softly, yet it was empty. Perchance the keeper had removed something insignificant, something she would not miss. She lay in bed tired, hoping that the nightmarish spell was broken. But when she woke up, something was out of place. Her reflection in the bedroom mirror was distorted. Her eyes were still green, her hair still auburn, but her face was a mask, unfamiliar. She reached out and touched her cheek, and the feeling was numb, as though her skin was someone else's. Alarm coursed through her. She attempted recalling her childhood, her parents, her grandmother's face, but the images were hazy, like photographs left in the rain. The keeper had removed something, but it was not a secret. It was she herself. She dashed for the book, turning its pages over. The binding spell was erased, overwritten with a new text. The keeper takes what is offered and more. In order for you to free yourself, you have to confront it. The words seeped into her, bitter and absolute. The whispers grew louder, taunting, her own name a rhyme that chanted in the cottage. The shadows shifted, not merely in corners but on walls, in shapes that flickered and disappeared when faced directly. She couldn't run. The cottage had imprisoned her, and the keeper was its jailer. She mustered all she had and went back into the circle. The candle had disappeared, but the burned lines still emitted a faint, eerie light, as if they had a life of their own. She did not need the book any longer. The spell was in her head, seared there by terror. She knelt, her fists hard, and spoke. "Show yourself," she said, her voice firm despite the horror ripping inside of her. "I'm not afraid of you." It was a lie, but she hoped she made it sound believable. The air thundered, the cottage quivering as if a storm had struck it. The shadows coiled, forming the figure once more, taller, denser, its face of blank, unseeing eyes inches ahead of her. It spoke her name, its voice a cutting blade that pierced her mind. She stood up, not backing down. "Take what you need, but release me," she said. The figure tilted its head, as if weighing its options. It reached out, its hand a vacuum of burning cold on her chest. She screamed, tumbling into blackness, its voice in her head, speaking promises she did not want to hear. Evelyn awakened on the ground, the circle cold beneath her. The cottage was quiet, the air stagnant. The book rested closed, its cover pale, as if its life had been sucked out of it. She was sore, her head weighed down with pieces of dreams, blackness, whispers, and a voice that offered secrets that seared. She reached for her chest, where the keeper's hand had touched, but there was no mark, yet she felt its chill, a wound that was not of the body. The circle disappeared, chalk and burned lines erased, although she had not touched them. The candle was on the table, unlit, its wax unbroken, as if it had never been lit. She stood up, her legs trembling, and made sure of the front door. It opened smoothly, the woods clear of mist now. She had a call on her phone, messages from Sarah. The cottage was ordinary again, its heavy weight gone. But Evelyn was not deceived. The keeper did not leave. She sensed it, a presence in her head, watching. She opened the book for the final time, in need of knowing what had transpired. The pages were new, the writing easier to read, as if the keeper had revised it. The last passage, written in English, declared, "The keeper is bound, but not to the circle. It resides in you, the truth you are unable to forget." Evelyn gasped. The binding hadn't kept the keeper in check, it had bound it to her, a parasite in her soul. The price was not a memory or a secret. It was her liberty. She attempted to burn it, but the fire would not reach it, curling back from its edges as if in fear. She buried it, far in the forest, beneath a heap of stones. She exited the cottage, locking the door, and drove into the city, hoping distance would dull the keeper's grasp. But in the darkness of night, the whispers grew, softer, but more intimate, speaking the truths she did not want to hear. Of her fears, her guilt, the things she'd buried in the deepest places of herself. The keeper was with her, its faceless presence in every darkness, its whisper in every silence. She sought assistance. She went to libraries, churches, even a medium, but there was no one that could help her. The book was lost, but its strength resided with her, and the keeper became stronger, its whispers forming visions. She was shown visions, of her grandmother's passing, her own destiny, of a world in which secrets were commodities and the keeper was ruler. She couldn't sleep, terrified of what she'd see when she did. Months went by, and Evelyn changed. Her smile was strained, her eyes sunken. Sarah noticed, but Evelyn couldn't tell anyone. How could she explain the presence that resided within her, eating its way out of her head? She changed apartments, then changed apartments yet again, but the keeper was always there, its presence inescapable. It was worse in mirrors. Her face was hers, but sometimes out of the corner of her eye, she caught glimpses of it, tall, eyeless, standing behind her. One evening, she was desperate, and she attempted to confront it. She sat in the darkness, addressing the shadows. "What do you want?" she asked. The air turned icy, and the whispers turned into a voice, sharp and audible. "Truth," it said. "All of it." Evelyn laughed, broken and bitter. She had no truths, only terror. But the keeper did not care. It desired everything: her mind, her soul, her being. She resisted, holding on to recollections of her grandmother, of love, of hope. But the keeper did not let up, its voice a tidal wave that battered her down. She ceased going out, ceased answering telephone calls. Her world narrowed to her apartment, then her bedroom, then the corner of the floor where she rocked, mumbling to herself in order to mask the voice of the keeper. Eventually, Evelyn vanished. Her apartment was empty, the walls scarred by sigils that made no sense. The book was never recovered, but it said that it's still out there, in wait for someone else's inquiring mind. And in Blackthorn Hollow, the cottage remains, its windows dark, its atmosphere thick with secrets. Locals steer clear of it, speaking of a shadow that moves in the forest, tall and sightless, speaking names in the darkness. It is not known what became of Evelyn. She became the keeper, her soul eaten, its hunger embracing her body, its vessel. Or she found a means of resistance, of binding it for real, but this cost is unimaginable. It is not that simple, nor that dreadful, for the truth is this simple, this horrifying: the keeper did not go. It remains, tied to those seeking its knowledge, its secret that cannot be undone. And in the silence, it is whispering your name somewhere. Ghost in the Basement. Elliot Harper stood on the cracked stone sidewalk, gazing up at the leaning Victorian house that was now his. The realtor had described it as a steal, a house with character that needed fixing, but Elliot perceived it as a relic of bygone lives, its windows dark and foreboding. At the age of 32, he yearned for a new beginning after a sour divorce, and the sleepy town of Grey Hollow offered solitude. The house, however, defied his enthusiasm. Its faded green paint chipped like dried-on skin, and the atmosphere around it hung heavy, as if the house let out a warning. Inside, his boxes were already littering the hardwood floors. The foyer had a scent of dust and something acrid, like wet iron. Elliot's footsteps rang out as he made his way through, the high ceilings magnifying every groan. The living room was large but dark, the heavy drapes cutting out the afternoon sun. The bedrooms on the second floor were cold, the wallpaper curling up at the edges. It all felt wrong, but Elliot attributed it to the age of the house and his own fatigue. And then he discovered the basement door. It was hidden beneath the staircase, warped wood with a rust knob that stuck when he twisted it. Curiosity pulled on him, but the door did not move, and he left it for now. He had too many boxes to unpack for wrestling with obstinate locks. That evening, he lay on a mattress in the master bedroom, the quiet of Grey Hollow nudging up against the windows. Sleep was slow in coming, broken up by the intermittent creak of the house settling. At midnight, he was suddenly awakened by a noise. It was faint, but clear, a slow, pulsating thumping, like a heartbeat traveling through the walls. Elliot sat up, his breathing shallow, his ears straining to pinpoint its location. It appeared to emanate from beneath, far down in the house. The basement. He reassured himself that it was pipes, possibly a furnace turning on, but the rhythm was too intentional, too alive. He lay back, drawing the cover up tight, and attempted to disregard the prickle in his skin. The following morning, he prized open the basement door with a crowbar. The hinges shrieked, and a narrow staircase came into sight, leading into darkness. Cold, sour air wafted up, with a hint of a metallic taste. Elliot flipped the light switch, but the solitary bulb in the cellar flickered feebly, casting jagged shadows on the walls. He hesitated, and then retrieved a flashlight and descended, each step groaning beneath his weight. The cellar was a concrete cave, with cobwebs clinging everywhere and rusting tools littering the ground. Shelves along one of the walls supported jars of milky liquid that he did not venture near. In the center, a heavy drain grill was screwed down into the floor, with dark stains around its edges. He swept the flashlight's beam around the room, and a shiver crept up his neck. Shadows appeared to move, not with his light, but in opposition, as if they had mass. He nagged himself that it was his imagination, but last night's pounding reverberated in his head. He rushed back up the stairs, slamming the door shut. What was downstairs could remain there. He was not prepared to confront it. For the next couple of days, Elliot plunged headlong into unpacking, dreading the basement. He hung his pictures, mopped his floors, and attempted to make the house his own. But the sounds continued, pounding during the night, and periodically followed by a faint scratching, the sound of nails on cement. He inspected the basement door every night, checking that it was shut, but the noise increased, became louder, more persistent. The pounding ceased one night, while he was lying awake, but a whisper broke the silence, so faint he was certain he had merely dreamed it. It was a single word, elongated, guttural. "Leave." Elliot's heart raced. He did not have a belief in ghosts, yet the word hung in his head, clear and real. Early the next morning, he had a local handyman come by to check the basement for any leaky pipes, in the hopes of a logical answer. The handyman was a gruff old fellow named Roy, and he was down in the basement for 10 minutes, then up, pale. "Ain't no pipes creating that noise," he muttered, refusing Elliot's gaze. "You might want to speak with someone familiar with the history of this house." When Elliot asked for specifics, Roy just shrugged and departed. That evening, the whispering grew louder, interweaving through the pounding like a murmur of accusations. Elliot couldn't hear the actual words, but their tone was accusatory, furious. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, clenching his phone, weighing his decision on whether or not to go. He had sunk all of his savings into this house, and leaving was not an option. What was going on? He had to get answers. He'd go into the town library tomorrow morning and research the house's history. The basement, whatever lived there, was not going to chase him out, not yet. The Grey Hollow Library was a squat brick structure on the outskirts of town, its windows filmed with age. Elliot got there in the morning, the mist still lingering on the streets. The librarian, Marjorie, was a wiry woman with sharp eyes that narrowed in greeting. He said he was writing a research piece on his new residence on Maple Street, speaking in a relaxed tone in an attempt not to sound crazy. Marjorie's face drew together, but she took him through to a back room filled with local records and newspaper clippings. "Maple Street's got stories," she said, retrieving a dusty binder from a shelf. "Not all of them nice." She left him to sift through, her footsteps disappearing into the drone of the fluorescent lights. Elliot opened the binder, its yellowed, brittle pages unfolding like wax. The house, constructed in 1890, had passed hands dozens of times, usually in short tenures. Newspaper clippings suggested tragedies: a fire in 1923, a disappearance of a family in 1948, but there were rarely details beyond that. A 1965 clipping caught his eye. "Local man killed in Maple Street house." The man, Thomas Varn, had been found in the basement, his blood drained from his body. The coroner had declared it a suicide, but local residents spoke of murder. The article spoke of Varn's fascination with the house, alleging that he had been hearing voices that commanded him to remain. Elliot's stomach twisted. The pounding, the whispers, this wasn't his imagination. He made a Xerox of the article and delved further, tracking down a ledger of property histories. The house had sat boarded up for decades following Varn's passing, unsellable until a developer rehabilitated it in the 2000s. No mention of the basement in particular, but a hasty note in the margin of the ledger said, "Avoid lower level. Unclean." The word unclean, made him shudder, casting his mind back over the grime on the drain grate. At home, the house was colder, the air heavy with anticipation. Elliot dodged the basement door, but its presence hung over him, a dark, watchful eye. He laid the photocopies out on the kitchen table, reading the article on Varn over for a third time. The man had lived by himself, as Elliot did, and the whispers had consumed his sanity. Was that in his future? He pushed the thought aside and turned his attention to practical action. He'd search the basement, this time with tools in hand to force open that drain cover. If there was something down there, pipes, animals, something worse, he'd discover it. That evening, the sounds increased. The pounding was no longer rhythmic but wild, as if something was pounding on something to escape. The whispers became more vocal, forming broken sentences. "You don't belong, dig deeper, blood stays." Elliot burrowed in his blankets, his flashlight held tight like a talisman. The sounds appeared to emanate from within his head, not the house, their tone altering from fury to desperation. He did not sleep, and by morning, his nerves were frayed. He stalked up with a crowbar and lantern, forcing himself down into the basement. The air was colder, the metal scent stronger. He went on his knees beside the drain cover, its dark stains shining in the lantern light. The bolts were rusted but loose, as if they had been tampered with in the past. Closing his eyes, he worked the crowbar, prompting the whispers all around him, like a swarm. "Stop," they hissed. "You'll see." His hands trembled, but he levered up the cover, and a black hole was exposed beneath. The stench that welled up was rank, like rot and metal combined. He held out the lantern, anticipating pipes or dirt, but there was just darkness, a shaft that plunged into forever. Something shifted in the darkness beneath. Not a form, but a hint of movement, as of waves on water. Elliot stepped back, his heart racing. The whispers grew, now a tumult. "You awakened it, too late, blood calls." He fled up the stairs, slamming the door and barricading it with a chair. The pounding continued louder, rattling the floorboards. What was in the basement was not a ghost. It was something older, hungrier. He could not ignore it any longer. He had to know what Varn had discovered, what the house held. Tomorrow, he'd search out anyone Varn had met or the house's past. The truth was his best weapon, but thinking of going up against that darkness a second time terrified him. Elliot hardly slept, the pounding and whispers plaguing his dreams. Come morning, he was set on getting his questions answered. Marjorie in the library had spoken of a Harold Grayson, a former carpenter who worked on the Maple Street house during its renovation in the 2000s. If anyone was going to know something of the basement, it was he. Elliot located Grayson's house in the town directory and drove out to a weathered farmstead on the outskirts of Grey Hollow. The yard was riotously overgrown, the porch groaning with the weight of abandonment. Grayson opened the door, a hunched-over figure with watery eyes and face etched with lines. He narrowed his eyes at Elliot, then nodded and stepped aside without speaking. The living room was filled with old furniture, and piped smoke hung heavy in the air. Elliot described his predicament, the sounds, the whispers, the drain cover. Grayson's face grew serious, and he collapsed into a chair, clasping his hands as if to warm them. "You shouldn't have opened that grate," said Grayson, his tone low. "That house isn't right. Never was." He spoke of his years of renovating. They'd avoided the basement upon discovering strange markings on the walls, claw-tip scratches, too deep for any animal. A young worker had descended alone one night and returned shaken, reporting that he'd seen a figure in the darkness. He quit the following day. Grayson himself had sensed being observed, the air becoming heavy when he approached the drain grate. "We sealed it tighter than a tomb," he said. "Told the developer to leave it alone." Elliot pushed for more. Grayson hesitated, then talked of childhood rumors. The house was always said to be cursed, built on land on which something wrong had been done. Nobody was certain what, but the town kept its distance. Thomas Varn, the one who died in the basement, had been digging up those rumors, fixated on the thought that the house was hiding something. He thought he could repair it, Grayson said. Thought he could make peace with whatever is down there. Look what it did for him. Grayson's gaze darted to the window, as if anticipating something peeking in. Whatever is down in that basement isn't a ghost. Not a ghost like you think, anyway. It's older. It desires something, and it uses the house to obtain it. He would not speak further, but insisted that Elliot get out of the house and stay out for good. Burn it down if you can, he said, half in earnest. Just don't go back in that basement. He drove home, Grayson's words replaying in his head. The house loomed larger, its windows staring back like eyes that followed him home. Inside, it was colder, the silence heavy. He glanced in the basement. The chair was still in place, but there were scratches in the wood, as if something had attempted to claw its way out. His skin crawled, but he couldn't go anywhere, not yet. He had to have proof, something that made sense of the madness that crept into his life. That night, he planted a tape recorder near the basement door in hopes of capturing the whispers. At midnight the pounding began, louder than ever, rattling the walls. The tape recorded the whispers, now audible and sinister. You opened it, you're ours, blood for blood. Elliot replayed the tape, his hands shaking. The sounds were not of humans. They were multi-layered, distorted, like a choir of things that imitated humans. He turned off the tape, unable to listen any further. Desperate, he browsed for anything on the house or Varn. A local history blog had mentioned that Varn had kept a diary, donated to the town museum upon his passing. If it had hints, Elliot had to see it. But as he thought of his next step, the basement door rattled, the chair sliding a single inch. He froze, his gaze fixed on the door. The air thickened, the metal scent overpowering. Something was moving closer, its presence pushing on the wood. Elliot stepped back, his breath catching. He couldn't spend the night in the house. He grabbed his keys and ran out into a motel, the whispers pursuing him into the night. The motel room was clean and still, but Elliot couldn't get rid of the impression that the house had come with him. The whispers resounded in his head, and the sound of the basement door creaking still made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He hardly got any sleep, and by the morning, he was in the Grey Hollow Museum, a tiny structure with artifacts of the town's history. The curator, a friendly woman by the name of Ellen, escorted him to a glass case that held Thomas Varn's diary, a brown leather-bound volume, its pages bent with age. He signed for it, his hands trembling. He sat at a table, opened the diary, its ink faded but not illegible. Varn's writings had started out cheerful, his move into the house on Maple Street in 1964. But soon the tone changed. He spoke of sounds in the basement, thumping, scratching, and whispers that said his name. He detailed the drain grate, how it appeared to have a life on its own. I dream of it, he had written. A darkness that watches, that wants me near. Varn's fascination grew. He did research on the house, discovering legends of an old ritual performed on the property in the 1800s, a sacrifice that had been made to something ancient, something earthbound. The house had been constructed over the ground, and the basement was its core. Varn believed that the drain grate was a seal, imprisoning the thing. But it was breaking down, and it required blood in order for it to get stronger. His last entry was panicked. I opened up the grate. It's awake. I can't escape. It won't let me. Elliot closed the diary, his mouth dry. Varn's account was the same as his own, the sounds, the whispers, the basement's pull. He photocopied the pertinent pages and departed, the curator's inquiring gaze on his back. At the motel, he reread the writings, fitting together the facts. The presence in the basement was not a ghost but something ancient, something that preyed on blood and terror. Varn had attempted to face it and paid the price with his life. Elliot was next unless he did something. He thought over Grayson's suggestion that he burn the house down, but that was too extreme. Instead, he read up on how to seal the entity, browsing online websites and occult sites. They were mostly rubbish, but one spoke of salt and iron as repellents for evil spirits. It was a long chance, but Elliot purchased bags of salt and iron filings from a hardware store, along with a heavy-duty padlock for the basement entrance. He did not think he was all that into rituals, but he had run out of ideas. It was like entering a trap when he went back inside. The air was heavy, the metal scent strangling. Elliot worked fast, sprinkling salt around the basement door and iron filings on the threshold. He locked the padlock, his hands trembling as the whispers grew stronger. "You can't prevent it. You're involved. Blood ties." Thuds resonated on the floor, and the door creaked, as if whatever was on the other side rested its weight on it. Elliot stepped back, gripping a kitchen knife for reassurance. He remained in the living room that night, the recorder still going. The sounds were incessant, the whispers a scream now. "Open it! Finish it! You're mine!" The air became dense, shadows curling around the edges of his perception. It was there then, a presence in the dark, not fixed but fluid, like ink flowing through water. It hovered beside the basement doorway, its boundaries pulsating with the thumping rhythm. Elliot's breath caught, his muscles stopping in place. The presence did not move any further, but its presence was heavy, weighing on his resolve. He couldn't remain. The salt and iron had done nothing, the thing was too powerful. But turning back was like admitting defeat, and something in him, the something that listened for whispers in his sleep, was fascinated by what was beneath the grate. Varn had done this, and Elliot felt it, a morbid curiosity that was twisted together with dread. He had to stop this, not just for himself but for anyone else in the house. Tomorrow morning, he'd descend into the basement, armed with whatever he had. It terrified him, but there was no choice. He awoke on the living room floor, the knife still held tight in his hand. The house was quiet, but the silence was worse than the pounding. It was as if the presence waited. He picked up his items, lantern, crowbar, salt, iron filings, and a cross around his neck that he had discovered in a trunk, something his mother had left behind. He had no idea it would do anything, but its weight was slight reassurance. The padlocked basement door hung there, its metal glinting in the morning sun. Scratches on the wood were deeper now, etched in patterns that resembled writing he did not recognize. He opened the door, the sound of the click echoing like a gunshot. The frigid air that escaped was rank with decay and iron. Elliot scattered salt over the entrance with a muttered prayer he hardly recalled. The lantern threw a wavering beam as he went down, every step a test of his need to flee. The basement was darker still, the solitary bulb now extinguished. The drain cover was in the center, its rim shining as if damp. The shadows shifted once more, this time not with his light, but despite it, twisting like smoke. Elliot hunkered down beside the grate, his chest heaving. The whispers had grown back, now a singing, throbbing hum that resonated in his bones. He poured iron filings over the grate, hoping to dull whatever was beneath. The hum swelled, grew irate, and the grate quivered, like something was being pressed upon it. Elliot clasped the crowbar, his hands greased with sweat. He did not wish to gaze into the abyss once more, but he could not help himself. He had to stop it. He inserted the crowbar beneath the grate and pulled. It groaned as it opened, disclosing the dark shaft. The stench was overwhelming, that of a grave, opened. The lantern's light caught something in the darkness, a glint, like light reflected by eyes. Elliot stopped, his breath catching in his throat. The whispers built, now a chorus of voices, calling his name in unison. Elliot! Elliot, join us! The glint shifted, ascending, and he saw it, a figure, not human but imitating one, its edges fraying like wisps of smoke. It was the being, and it was awake. He panicked, but he made himself move. He poured salt into the shaft, hoping to ensnare it. The creature shrieked, its sound ripping through his head, and the basement trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. The form lunged, not touching him but passing through, its cold burning. Elliot stepped back, releasing the lantern. It flickered but remained alight, casting wild shadows on the walls. The creature hung over the grill, its form throbbing, growing solid. He could see faces in it, Varnes, and others he did not recognize, captive, silently screaming. He grasped the cross, holding it out in front of him like a shield. The thing recoiled, but slightly, its hum now a growl. He realized it wasn't the cross, it was his own fear fueling it. He had to act, not retreat. He let out a yell and pushed the grate back into position, slamming it down. The thing shrieked, its sound splitting his ears, but he did not desist. He poured the last of the salt and iron over the grate, closing it as best he could. The trembling slowed, its hum reducing to a whisper. But it wasn't finished. The presence was still there, weakened but alive, in anticipation. Elliot climbed up the stairs, closing the door tightly behind him. The house was still, but the stillness was a pretense. He stuffed a bag with his belongings, knowing he couldn't remain. The presence had touched him, and he sensed it in his sleep, in the movement of shadows out of the corners of his eyes. He departed that day, the house vacant behind him. Months passed, and Elliot found out the house had burned down, its cause unspecified. He informed himself it was finished, but in the dead of night, he could hear whispers, weak but persistent. The presence had not died, it had accompanied him, a shard of darkness from the basement in his psyche. He never went back to Grey Hollow, but the terror remained, evidence that some doors, opened, may not be closed.